What would you do if you paid for a first-class seat, only to be told you didn't belong there? What if strangers mocked you, live-streamed your humiliation, and the very people in charge threatened to drag you away? This is not just another story of turbulence in the sky. This is the story of Dr. Amira Johnson, a woman who sat quietly in seat 2A and refused to surrender her dignity. On a flight where bias masqueraded as protocol, her calm strength exposed an uncomfortable truth: sometimes the real battle isn't fought at 30,000 feet with engines roaring, but in the silent war over who is seen as worthy of respect. Why did a flight attendant risk her entire career to push Amira out? Why did a fellow passenger broadcast cruelty to hundreds of thousands? And how did a single phone call transform a scene of humiliation into a moment of history? Stay with us, because this story will shake you, inspire you, and leave you questioning how we treat one another when no one is supposed to be watching. Before we dive in, don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss the stories that matter. The jet bridge hummed with that faint vibration every traveler knows. The metallic groan of an aluminum tunnel leading to a cabin suspended in the sky. Dr. Amira Johnson moved with unhurried steps, her leather carry-on balanced in one hand, a pearl stud glinting in each ear. She dressed without extravagance: charcoal blazer, white silk blouse, and dark slacks, but the quiet confidence in her posture made her presence hard to ignore. At 42, she had the bearing of someone who had fought her way through storms and learned to walk through turbulence without flinching. First class was already half full. Men in pressed suits scrolled their phones with distracted entitlement. A woman with blonde hair too tightly styled for comfort adjusted her Hermes scarf and scowled at anyone who dared invade her bubble. Amira's seat assignment was clear: 2A, window, left side. A small sanctuary where she planned to review documents for a board meeting scheduled later that afternoon. She placed her boarding pass in the flight attendant's hand with practiced ease. Melissa Grant, lead attendant for this flight, glanced at the ticket with a flicker of annoyance that flashed and then lingered. Her lips tightened. Her eyes darted to Amira's blazer and then back to the boarding pass. First class, Melissa asked, voice flat, as though the very words carried disbelief. Yes, Amira answered softly. Seat 2A. Melissa's smile never reached her eyes. Enjoy your flight, she said, but the pause between each word was laced with something colder. Amira walked on, shoulders square, jaw unclenched. She had endured looks like that before in boardrooms, in luxury hotels, even at her own company's shareholder meetings when people assumed the only black woman in the room must be someone's assistant. But the seat was hers. She knew it. The barcode had scanned. The system had verified. And still, she felt the invisible trial begin before she had even reached her row. She placed her carry-on in the overhead compartment, slid into the leather seat, and let her fingers rest lightly on the armrest. Seat 2A was hers, paid in full, earned without apology. Across the aisle, Victoria Hale, the blonde woman with the Hermes scarf, narrowed her eyes. Her phone was already open, the camera angled low, like she was preparing for some performance to come. The curl of her lips suggested contempt before a word was even spoken. Amira pulled out her phone to glance at an incoming message. Board meeting shifted to 3:00 p.m. Need your presence. Amira, stock volatility prepare statement. The words made her inhale slowly. Business could wait until touchdown. For now, She wanted quiet, but quiet was not what awaited her. Melissa reappeared, her heels striking the aisle like a metronome. She stopped at row 2, glanced from Amira to the boarding pass still clutched in her hand, and frowned. "Ma'am," she began, voice pitched just loud enough for surrounding passengers to hear. "I believe there's been a mistake. This seat doesn't belong to you." Amira turned her head calmly, eyes steady. "It does," she replied. "Seat 2A, paid ticket, diamond status." She handed over her digital boarding pass again. Melissa scanned it with her device. The green check mark blinked, undeniable. Still, she shook her head. "Sometimes these systems glitch," she muttered. "You should take a seat in economy. Row 31 is available." Her words rang like a gavel in the silent cabin. Passengers craned their necks. Whispers floated half disbelief, half curiosity, and from the aisle seat 2B, Victoria Hale leaned forward. "Phone already recording. This is ridiculous," Victoria said loudly, ensuring the cabin heard her. "I paid good money for this section. We shouldn't have to share it with people who clearly don't belong here." Amira's chest tightened, but her face remained serene. She had lived long enough to know when confrontation was inevitable. The sting wasn't new. What stung was how quickly strangers accepted a false narrative as truth. Melissa crossed her arms, tapping her nails against the boarding pass scanner. "Ma'am, you need to move to economy now, or I'll have to escalate this." Amira folded her hands in her lap, inhaled deeply, and let silence speak for her. Her stillness unsettled the crowd. From business class, Paul Anderson, the flight supervisor, approached. He had 2 decades of airline experience, and his weary eyes carried the weight of a man who had broken up too many disputes in narrow aisles. "What's the issue?" "Melissa," he asked. Melissa thrust the boarding pass toward him. "Fraudulent ticket. She's refusing to move." Paul examined the pass, scanned it again, and saw the same truth Melissa had ignored. The ticket was legitimate. The seat was hers. Yet the presence of Victoria's recording phone, the muttering passengers, the simmering social pressure. Paul hesitated. "Sometimes there are errors," he said, his tone hedged. "It would be easier if you just moved to the back. We'll make you comfortable." Amira locked eyes with him. "No," she said simply. "I will sit in the seat I purchased." Victoria smirked into her phone, whispering for her viewers, "Look at this. Entitled much. They get one lucky upgrade and think they run the place." A pang of anger rippled through Amira's chest, but she pressed it down. Anger would only feed them. Calm was her weapon, dignity her shield. Inside, though, her thoughts churned. Again, always again. Why must proof never be enough? She considered the upcoming board meeting. The contracts worth billions, the power she held unseen. She wondered how long she should let them dig this grave before she revealed the shovel was in her hand all along. Melissa's voice cut through again. "If you don't comply, I'll have to call security when we land. You'll be removed from the aircraft." Whispers spread. The businessman in 1A shook his head, muttering something about people these days. The aisle began to feel narrower, the air thicker, the invisible noose tightening. Amira's phone buzzed again. Another message. Emergency session possible. Market impact worsening. "We need you." She silenced it, placed the phone face down on the tray table, and folded her arms across her chest. The choice crystallized. She would not move. Not this time. Not for convenience. not for someone else's comfort at the cost of her dignity. The cabin was no longer just a cabin. It was a stage, a courtroom, a crucible. And in seat 2A, Amira Johnson prepared to let silence speak until the time came to unleash the truth. Her pearl earrings caught the cabin light again, calm, still, waiting. The hum of the cabin settled into that familiar rhythm of overhead bins slamming shut, passengers jockeying for space, and the dull announcements about seat belts and tray tables. Yet row 2 had become something else entirely. It had turned into a stage where eyes lingered, voices murmured, and the quiet veneer of first-class civility peeled away. Dr. Amira Johnson sat with her back straight, her gaze fixed not on Melissa Grant or the sneering passenger beside her, but on the window where the late afternoon light washed the wing in gold. She refused to give them the satisfaction of visible irritation. Still, her thoughts roared. She'd been here before, in different costumes, different theaters. Sometimes it was a conference table where colleagues assumed she was there to take notes. Sometimes it was a charity gala where donors mistook her for hired staff. And now it was this plane, where money and status meant nothing in the face of prejudice that clung like smoke. Melissa's heels clicked again as she moved down the aisle, whispering in hushed tones to another attendant. The words were too low to hear, but the glances were sharp, cutting toward Amira like daggers. Victoria Hale, planted in the aisle seat, kept her phone angled just enough to catch Amira in frame. Her smile was practiced, rehearsed, the kind of grin that thrived on someone else's discomfort. You see this Victoria's voice carried softly but deliberately. This is what happens when people think they can cheat the system. First class isn't a lottery ticket. A man in row 3 chuckled under his breath. Another shook his head, muttering about fraud. Amira clasped her hands together in her lap. She reminded herself to breathe, to remain composed, to resist the sharp edge of anger that pressed against her ribs. Yet her thoughts were restless. How many times would she be tested? How many times would silence and composure be her only shields? Her mind drifted back to her father, who once told her at the kitchen table, "Amira, dignity is not about what they give you. It's about what you refuse to surrender." He had said those words after a neighbor spat slurs at him, after he walked away without swinging back. She remembered his hands on hers, rough from years of factory work, teaching her the paradox of strength and restraint. She carried that lesson into every boardroom, every negotiation, and now, every flight. Melissa returned, the lines around her mouth taut with frustration. She crouched slightly, placing herself at Amira's eye level, her tone coated in artificial politeness. "Ma'am, I'll ask one more time. Are you certain this is your seat?" Amira tilted her head slightly. "Do you have reason to doubt the scanner or the ticket that was issued directly by your airline?" Melissa's smile flickered, the kind that signaled irritation rather than warmth. "It's just unusual, that's all. Mistakes happen." "Indeed," Amira replied evenly, "but not on my part." Victoria interjected, her voice louder now, aimed at the surrounding passengers. "Honestly, this is absurd. She's holding up the entire boarding process. Some of us have real places to be." Paul Anderson, the supervisor, hovered nearby, torn between protocol and the pressure of an impatient crowd. He checked his watch, then the cabin door, calculating delays in his head. For him, this was another operational snag, another metric that would show up in his report. But For Amira, this was more than delay. This was the essence of her life's battle, being forced to prove her legitimacy in spaces she had already earned. "Let's keep it moving," Paul said finally, his tone carrying the weariness of compromise. "Dr. Johnson, perhaps you'd be more comfortable in business class. We can offer complimentary drinks, and I'm already comfortable here," Amira interrupted, her tone calm but unyielding. "This is the seat I purchased." Her words hung in the air, firm, immovable. Paul sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. The murmurs around them grew louder, the tension spreading like static electricity through the cabin. Jordan Carter, a young man seated in row 4, lifted his phone discreetly. Unlike Victoria, his camera didn't sneer. His eyes showed curiosity, unease, maybe even empathy. He had been recording since Melissa first questioned Amira, uncertain why, but sensing that something important was unfolding. Amira noticed the subtle glow of his screen, the way he angled it to capture Melissa's insistence, Victoria's disdain, and her own quiet resolve. She didn't mind. In some ways, she welcomed it. Truth needed witnesses. The intercom crackled. Captain Robert Hughes's voice drifted over the speakers, smooth but distant. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are just about ready to depart. Please take your seats so we can prepare for pushback." His voice was steady, but Amira caught the subtext. He was telling them all to resolve this quickly, without escalation. He didn't want headlines. He didn't want conflict. He wanted an on-time departure. Melissa straightened, folding her arms. "You heard the captain. Let's not delay this further. Please gather your belongings and move." The weight of expectation pressed on Amira. Every eye in the cabin seemed to demand compliance. Even those who hadn't spoken stared with that mix of curiosity and judgment, as though she were the one creating the disruption rather than the victim of it. Her chest rose and fell slowly. Inside her mind, 2 voices collided. One whispered, "Just move. It's easier. Save your strength for the battles that matter." The other thundered, "This is the battle that matters. If you yield here, you yield everywhere." She thought of the young black interns she mentored, the ones who asked if they would ever be taken seriously in corporate America. She thought of her nieces, bright-eyed and eager, who deserved to live in a world where their presence in first class was not a spectacle. No, she decided, she would not move. "Melissa," she said quietly, the tone of her voice carrying more weight than volume. "The boarding pass is valid. The seat is mine. I will not relocate." The silence after her statement was profound, broken only by the faint hiss of the air conditioning system. Even Paul seemed caught off guard by the certainty in her voice. Victoria huffed, shaking her head. "Unbelievable. She thinks she's some kind of queen." Amira turned her gaze toward Victoria for the first time, her expression unreadable. "No," she said softly, "I think I am a paying passenger, entitled to the dignity your airline promised. For the first time." Victoria's smirk faltered, Melissa's face flushed. "If you insist on making this difficult, we will handle it when we land. Security will meet us at the gate." There it was, the threat, the escalation, the promise of public humiliation on top of private insult. Amira sat back, her posture composed, her heartbeat steadying. She had been underestimated too many times to crumble now. She looked once more at the wing outside, at the light beginning to soften as the sun lowered. Then she closed her eyes briefly, hearing her father's voice again. Dignity is not about what they give you. It's about what you refuse to surrender. Her decision was final. She would not surrender, and though she could not yet see how this flight would transform into a crucible, she knew this moment would echo far beyond seat 2A. The overhead bins slammed shut one by one, and the cabin doors sealed with that hollow metallic click. Yet row 2 was far from settled. The murmurs that had begun as whispers now carried across the first-class cabin like ripples spreading over still water. Passengers leaned into aisles, glancing over seats, some pretending to scroll their phones while secretly listening to every word. Others abandoned the pretense altogether, openly watching as though the tension between Dr. Amira Johnson, the lead flight attendant, Melissa Grant, and the smug passenger Victoria Hale were part of an unscheduled in-flight entertainment program. Jordan Carter, the young man in row 4, kept his phone steady. His livestream numbers were climbing. Comments scrolled quickly across his screen. Half disbelief, half outrage, some echoing Victoria's contempt, others rallying to Amira's side. Jordan hadn't expected this when he boarded with nothing more than plans to visit family in New York. Now he found himself documenting what felt like history unfolding 30,000 feet in the air. Victoria was thriving in the attention. She angled her body, voice pitched for maximum volume. "Can you all believe this?" she announced, flashing her camera toward Amira. "She's trying to take a seat that isn't hers. I mean, come on. Some of us paid top dollar for this experience. We shouldn't have to deal with freeloaders." The words sliced through the air. Several passengers gasped, but others nodded, complicit in silence. A man in row 3 chuckled and muttered, "Figures," under his breath. Amira felt every syllable like a stone thrown at glass, but she did not shatter. She sat still, back against the leather seat, hands folded neatly in her lap. Her silence unnerved them. They wanted her to explode, to match stereotype, to give them justification for their prejudice, but she would not. Melissa crossed her arms tightly, jaw clenched. "Let's not cause a scene," she said, as though Amira were the one responsible for the spectacle. Her voice carried that subtle accusation, framing Amira as the disruptor rather than the wronged. Amira's eyes flicked toward the window. She focused on the wing, its white paint glowing under the late sun. Inside, though, her mind was anything but calm. Memories collided boardrooms where men ignored her contributions until they were repeated by someone else. Award ceremonies where donors asked if she was catering staff. Childhood field trips where she was asked if she could afford the ticket. Each recollection burned, each indignity etched deeper into her soul. She inhaled slowly. The cabin's recycled air was sharp in her lungs. She thought of the interns she mentored, the women she sponsored, the next generation watching her without even knowing it. If she folded now, what message would she leave for them? Victoria leaned back with a self-satisfied sigh. Honestly, if she had any respect for herself, she'd stop embarrassing everyone and move. Jordan's camera captured that sentence perfectly. In the live stream chat, hearts and angry emojis battled across the feed. "Stay strong, Queen." One comment read, another, "This is discrimination, live on camera," and another, "Kick her out already." Paul Anderson, the supervisor, returned with a clipboard. He glanced at Melissa, then at Amira. His eyes showed fatigue, but his words revealed where his loyalties tilted. "Dr. Johnson, we can't delay departure any longer. Please cooperate." Amira turned her gaze on him. Her voice was measured, deliberate. Cooperate with being displaced, with being erased. My ticket is valid. My presence is valid. The only invalid thing here is how I'm being treated. Paul hesitated. He wanted order, not justice. He wanted quiet, not truth. And so he said nothing. Jordan's screen count ticked higher, 10,000, 15, 20. The cabin had become not just a stage but a global broadcast. Every word mattered now. Every silence screamed louder than any announcement. Amira's heart thudded steadily, like a drumbeat guiding her through the chaos, yet within her, doubt whispered. Was this worth it? She had a board meeting, waiting. She had $1 billion company dependent on her. Could she risk arrest, headlines, humiliation? She pictured her nieces' faces, wide-eyed, watching the news. She imagined them asking, "Auntie, why didn't you stand up for yourself?" That image anchored her. She would not move. Melissa leaned closer again. "You're putting us all in a difficult position," she said. "Think about the other passengers. Think about the children." Amira's eyes softened, but her voice remained firm. "I am thinking of the children. That is why I am still here." Victoria scoffed. "What does that even mean?" Amira finally turned to her, meeting her gaze directly. "It means I will not teach them to surrender dignity for someone else's comfort." The sentence landed like thunder. Even those who had muttered earlier fell quiet, sensing the gravity of her words. For a moment, the cabin stilled. Then the intercom chimed again. Captain Robert Hughes's voice, slightly strained, filled the space. "Ladies and gentlemen, please settle into your seats. We cannot begin taxiing until everyone is seated." The ultimatum pressed in. Paul shifted uncomfortably. Melissa tapped her pen against the clipboard. Victoria raised her eyebrows as though victory were certain. But Amira did not budge. She felt the weight of every eye, the pull of every doubt, the sting of every prejudice, and still she held her ground. Jordan zoomed in slightly, whispering to his viewers. "She's not moving. She's holding her seat." His chat exploded with fire emojis and clapping hands. The livestream had become a digital rally, strangers across the world urging Amira to resist. Melissa straightened, frustration sharp in her voice. "Fine. Have it your way. Security will deal with you in New York." Amira let the words wash over her. She knew the storm was building, but storms were not new to her. She had built empires in storms. She had survived tempests harsher than this. Inside, though, the battle raged. Should I reveal who I am now? Should I call Stephen Wallace? Should I bring down the weight of my position, or should I wait? Let them expose themselves fully before I strike. Her hand hovered near her phone, but she withdrew it. Not yet. Timing was everything. The murmurs resumed. Some passengers shook their heads in disbelief. Others whispered support too softly to carry. Victoria kept recording, her voice dripping with disdain. "This is going to be viral gold," she said. She was right, but not in the way she imagined. Amira adjusted her seatbelt, leaned back, and closed her eyes briefly. Her father's words returned once more. "Dignity is not about what they give you. It's about what you refuse to surrender." She would not surrender, and as the engines roared to life, the plane preparing to taxi, the world beyond the fuselage had already begun watching, waiting, judging. The crucible was set. The trial by silence and spectacle was underway, and in seat 2A, Amira Johnson prepared to endure it all, until the moment came to reveal the truth she carried quietly, like a hidden blade. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the aircraft pushed back from the gate. The safety video began playing on overhead screens, cheerful voices reminding passengers how to buckle a seatbelt as if they were all children on a school trip. But no one in first class was paying attention. All eyes still rested on row 2, where Dr. Amira Johnson sat silent but steady in her rightful seat. Melissa Grant stood in the aisle with her clipboard clutched tightly, her posture rigid. She'd hoped the captain's announcement would shame Amira into moving, but the woman's calm defiance unsettled her. It was easier when passengers shouted, when they flailed and confirmed stereotypes. But Amira's quiet strength unnerved her. It made her feel exposed. Paul Anderson, the flight supervisor, returned once more. His steps were slower now, his shoulders slightly hunched. He had spent decades smoothing over conflicts with vouchers and apologies. But this was different. The tension in the air was thick enough to choke on, and the livestream phones glowing throughout the cabin reminded him that whatever decision he made would not vanish into silence. "Dr. Johnson," Paul began, kneeling slightly beside her seat, as if proximity might soften the blow. "I need you to understand. This isn't personal. We have a schedule to keep. The captain needs clearance to taxi, and right now you're the holdup. If you would just relocate to business class, we could be airborne in minutes." Amira turned her head slowly, her expression calm, her tone unshaken. "Mr. Anderson, my ticket is for 2A. The system verified it, you verified it, and yet you asked me to surrender it for the convenience of others. Tell me, how is that not personal?" Paul's lips parted, then closed again. His eyes darted toward Melissa, who stood just behind him with crossed arms, watching like a hawk eager to see the prey subdued. "Sometimes it's about keeping the peace," Paul finally said. His voice carried the weary cadence of a man who had long ago learned to value quiet over justice. "One seat isn't worth disrupting an entire flight." Amira's eyes softened, though her voice sharpened. Peace built on injustice is not peace at all. It is silence forced on the wrong person. The words hit Paul harder than he expected. For a moment, his conscience stirred, but habit pressed it back down. He rubbed his forehead. "If you won't move, I'll have to escalate further." From the cockpit, the door opened with a click. Captain Robert Hughes stepped out briefly, his cap tilted, his brow furrowed. He had the look of a man who prided himself on order and timeliness, who saw himself less as a leader of people and more as a custodian of schedules. "What seems to be the problem here?" he asked. Though it was clear he already knew, Melissa jumped in eagerly. "This passenger refuses to relocate. Captain, she's claiming this seat is hers, but we've explained the situation. She's making it very difficult." Robert looked at Amira, then at the boarding pass still resting on her tray table. He scanned it with his eyes and saw what everyone else had seen: a valid ticket. No dispute about it. "Is this correct?" he asked Paul quietly. Paul nodded reluctantly. "Yes, it checks out." Robert exhaled through his nose. He wanted no part of this. "Then what's the issue?" "The issue," Melissa pressed, "is that she's refusing to cooperate. It's disruptive." Robert studied Amira for a moment. She sat still, her posture regal without being boastful, her hands folded, her expression composed. He recognized authority when he saw it, though he could not place why she carried it so effortlessly. He turned back to Melissa. If the ticket is valid, then the seat is hers. Melissa's mouth fell open slightly. But, Captain, that's the end of it. Robert cut her off. His tone was flat, weary. He was not defending Amira's dignity so much as defending his own timetable. We need to get moving. Melissa bristled, but she bit her tongue. She was not used to being corrected in front of passengers. Robert's eyes flicked back to Amira. Ma'am, I trust you'll remain seated and not cause further issues. We all want a smooth flight. It was a statement disguised as reassurance. But Amira caught the undertone. He had not defended her. He had defended convenience. He had not acknowledged her mistreatment. He had merely sought efficiency. Her chest tightened with a mix of frustration and clarity. This was how systems perpetuated themselves, not always through overt hostility, but through leaders who chose comfort over confrontation, order over fairness. Of course, Captain, she replied softly. Robert gave a curt nod and returned to the cockpit, glad to close the door behind him, glad to bury himself in instruments and autopilot rather than the mess of human prejudice outside. The engines rumbled louder, the plane inching toward the runway. Melissa shot Amira one last glare before storming back down the aisle, her heels sharp against the floor. Paul lingered for a moment longer. His conscience tugged at him, but his fear of disorder outweighed it. You've made things harder for yourself, he muttered under his breath before walking away. Amira closed her eyes for a moment. She let the sounds of the engines fill her ears. She let the vibration of the plane beneath her feet ground her. Inside, her heart ached. The small hope she carried that perhaps this time would be different, that perhaps fairness would prevail without her intervention faded away. She remembered her mother's words, spoken when she was just a girl. Child, the world will always ask you to step aside. The question is whether you will obey. She had obeyed enough in her life. Not anymore. Her phone buzzed again in her lap. She glanced down at the message, stock falling sharply. Emergency session required. Her company's world was wobbling even as her personal dignity was under siege. The irony struck her hard. She could control the trajectory of billions of dollars with one phone call. Yet, here she was being asked to prove she belonged in a single seat. She pressed her phone face down once more. She would handle both storms. The plane accelerated onto the runway, the roar of engines drowning out the whispers, but not the tension. As the wheels left the ground, Amira felt the weight of gravity pull her down even as the aircraft soared upward. She stared out the window, watching the city shrink below, her reflection faint in the glass. She saw herself not just as a passenger but as a mirror of countless others who had faced the same humiliation in smaller, quieter ways. Her resolve hardened. They thought this was about one seat, one flight, one inconvenience. They were wrong. This was about every battle fought in silence, every dignity stolen under the guise of order. Seat 2A would become more than a seat. It would become a statement. The aircraft steadied as it climbed above the cloud line. The golden light from the setting sun spilled through the windows, painting the cabin in soft amber. But inside row 2, there was nothing soft. The tension was brittle, ready to snap at the slightest touch. Melissa Grant strode back up the aisle with renewed determination. Her heels struck the floor sharply, each step punctuating her irritation. She stopped at Amira's seat and raised her voice just enough for the entire section to hear. Ma'am, this is your final warning. You're not permitted to sit here. If you don't move, You'll face consequences when we land." Her tone had shifted from the artificial politeness of earlier to outright hostility. The veneer was gone, replaced by the confidence of someone convinced that the crowd was on her side. The words cut through the hush of the cabin. Conversation stopped. Even the children 2 rows back sensed the drama and fell silent, eyes wide. Victoria Hale leaned into the spectacle like an actor basking in the spotlight. Her phone camera was fixed directly on Amira, and her commentary dripped with disdain. "See this?" "Everyone," she said, smiling toward the lens. "She's refusing to move, even after the crew explained the situation. This is what entitlement looks like. This is exactly why rules matter." Gasps came from a few passengers, but others chuckled, their shoulders shaking with approval. The herd mentality was taking hold. What began as whispers had grown into a collective judgment. A man in row 3 shook his head loudly enough for everyone to hear. "This is ridiculous. She's holding us all hostage over a seat. Just move already." Another chimed in, his voice dripping with scorn. "Probably forged the ticket. Happens more than you think." Amira sat perfectly still. She had trained her body to remain calm under fire boardroom ambushes, hostile negotiations, journalists who twisted her words. But this was different. This was not business. This was personal. This was her very identity on trial in front of strangers who were ready to convict without evidence. Her chest tightened, but she refused to let her breathing show it. She clasped her hands together, fingers interlacing tightly, as if to keep her own fury from spilling out. Jordan Carter shifted in his seat, his phone still recording. He looked uncomfortable, torn between fear of involvement and the pull of justice. His live stream audience was climbing by the second. 30,000, 40, 50. Comments scrolled rapidly across his screen. "She's strong. Don't let them do this. OMG, this is racism live. Kick her out already. Wasting our time." The digital world had joined the cabin, and the weight of both pressed down on Amira. Melissa leaned closer, her voice carrying the sharp edge of accusation. "You need to stop disrupting this flight. You are making a scene." Amira tilted her head slightly, her eyes steady. "I am sitting in the seat I purchased. You are the one creating the scene." For a heartbeat, silence reigned. Then Victoria barked a laugh, cruel and sharp. "Oh, she thinks she's clever, sitting there like a queen. Honey, this isn't your throne." Amira's gaze shifted toward her, cool and unwavering. "Respect is not a throne," she said softly. "It's a right." The remark should have ended it, but Victoria thrived on escalation. She turned her phone toward herself, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "See? This is what we deal with. People who think they can barge in, break rules, and then play the victim card. Pathetic." The word struck like a slap. Pathetic. Amira's pulse quickened. Inside, a storm raged. Why must I always be reduced to less than human before anyone will see the truth? Why is a proof never enough? Her mind screamed, but her face remained calm. She would not give them the satisfaction. Paul Anderson reappeared, his expression worn, his voice low but firm. "Dr. Johnson, please, I'm begging you. Just cooperate so we can all move on. You don't want this to get worse." Amira turned to him, her tone edged with steel. "Do you realize what you're asking me to do? You're asking me to surrender my dignity so the flight can run smoothly. You're asking me to erase myself for your convenience. Do you not see the injustice?" Paul's face tightened. He did see, but he lacked the courage to admit it. He glanced around at the watching faces, the impatient sighs, the live-stream cameras. "Sometimes compromise is necessary," he said weakly. Amira's eyes narrowed. "Compromise is when both sides give something. What exactly has the airline given up here? What has this passenger surrendered? No, this is not compromise. This is coercion." The truth of her words settled heavily over the cabin. A few passengers shifted uncomfortably, avoiding her gaze, but others still clung to their prejudices, unwilling to release them. Victoria rolled her eyes dramatically. "Oh, please, coercion. You're sitting in a seat you don't deserve, and now you're lecturing us about rights?" Jordan's camera caught the moment perfectly. The feed exploded with comments, many defending Amira, others parroting Victoria's venom. The divide was visible in real time, a digital reflection of the cabin's tension. Melissa raised her voice again, her patience gone. "This is the last time I'm asking. Move now or face removal in New York." The humiliation was complete. Amira had been put on trial, judged by strangers, and now threatened with arrest. Her face burned, not with shame, but with righteous anger contained beneath layers of control. She leaned back slowly, folding her arms across her chest, her voice quiet but carrying. "Do what you must. I will not move." Her defiance struck like lightning. Gasps echoed. Melissa's cheeks flushed crimson. Victoria smirked like she had won a game she had rigged. Paul shook his head, already anticipating the paperwork this would bring, but Amira sat unmoved. Inside, though, her heart pounded. Doubt gnawed at her. Am I making this worse? Will they drag me out in front of everyone? Will the headlines destroy the company I've built? Fear clawed at her resolve, but beneath it all, another voice roared louder, "This is the fight. This is the line. And if not me, then who?" The engines hummed louder, the plane leveling off at cruising altitude. Drinks were served to passengers who accepted them with nervous glances toward row 2. But no one dared speak to Amira. She was both isolated and central, the axis around which the entire cabin now revolved. Victoria whispered into her phone again. "Watch this, everyone. She's about to learn a hard lesson." Amira closed her eyes for a brief moment. She pictured her father's hands, rough and strong, teaching her how to hold on when the world wanted her to let go. She pictured her mother's eyes, fierce with pride, reminding her that worth is not something others can grant or deny. When she opened her eyes again, her resolve was carved in stone. They could humiliate her, they could threaten her, they could even drag her out, but they would not erase her. Not tonight, not ever again. The seatbelt sign glowed quietly above the aisle, a symbol of order that meant nothing inside row 2. The air in the cabin felt heavier now, as though even the recycled oxygen carried judgment. Dr. Amira Johnson sat still, her chin lifted slightly, eyes focused on the seat in front of her. Every nerve in her body was taut, but she refused to let them see it. Melissa Grant leaned down again, her voice no longer pretending at courtesy. "You've made your choice. When we land, security will be waiting. You'll be escorted off this aircraft in front of everyone." Her words carried like a sentence handed down in a courtroom. Gasps floated from nearby passengers, followed by low murmurs. A woman in row 3 whispered, "She should have just moved." A man across the aisle shook his head and muttered, "Not worth the trouble." But others shifted uncomfortably. Even those who had judged her began to sense the imbalance. the wrongness of what was happening. They watched, hesitant, their silence heavy with complicity. Victoria Hale, phone in hand, smirked into her camera. You all heard that. Security will take care of this. Finally. Some people just don't learn. She angled the lens back toward Amira, hungry for humiliation, savoring the digital attention. Amira's pulse thudded against her ribs. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing harder now. Fear whispered in her ear. What if they drag me out? What if the cameras capture me being manhandled? What if the headlines tomorrow read CEO arrested mid-flight? Her hand brushed against her phone on the tray table. She could end it now. She could dial Stephen Wallace, the airline's chairman, reveal herself, and bring the weight of her power crashing down on Melissa and Victoria in an instant. One call would flip the narrative, but she hesitated. Something in her told her to wait. Timing was everything. If she revealed too soon, the lesson would be lost. They would claim it was only about status, about influence, about wealth protecting her. No, they needed to show themselves fully, unmasked, for the world to see. She thought of her company. The board meeting loomed in her mind, shareholders anxious, stock fluctuating wildly. Every instinct as a business leader told her to cut losses, to minimize exposure, to control the narrative. Yet her soul resisted. This was bigger than business. This was about dignity, about drawing a line no one could cross. Melissa straightened and turned toward Paul Anderson. Make sure security is at the gate. Document her refusal. Paul scribbled reluctantly on his clipboard, his eyes avoiding Amira's. He did not want to be here. He did not want this fight. But weakness had carried him too far to choose another path now. Jordan Carter's camera caught it all. His live stream had crossed 100,000 viewers. Comments flooded in by the second. This is outrageous. Stand strong. Queen. She's about to get dragged out. Why isn't anyone helping her? The divide of public opinion mirrored the cabin itself. Half the passengers seemed content to watch her humiliation. The other half shifted uneasily, as if wishing someone else would step forward. Break the silence. Speak truth to the injustice. Amira sat frozen in place, but inside she was far from still. Her thoughts battled each other like storm waves crashing against rock. You should move. You'll save yourself embarrassment. The company needs you. You can't risk this. No. If you move, you tell every girl who looks like you that she should always step aside. You tell them dignity can be negotiated away. You tell them silence is safer than truth. Her breath deepened, her heartbeat slowing into steadiness. She remembered the night her mother sat on the edge of her bed when she was 12 years old. That was the night Amira had come home in tears after being called names at school, after being shoved aside on the bus. Her mother had stroked her hair gently and said, "Baby, one day the world will push you, and you'll feel so tired, so worn. You'll think about letting it, but promise me, this never let anyone decide your worth but you." That memory wrapped around her now like armor. She whispered inwardly, "I will not let them decide." Victoria laughed again, voice loud enough to cut through the silence. She thinks she's making some big stand. In reality, she's just embarrassing herself. Watch when the cops haul her out. Amira turned to look at her fully this time. Her eyes were calm, but behind them a fire glowed. "Embarrassment is not mine to carry," she said softly. "It belongs to those who choose cruelty over truth." Victoria blinked, caught off guard by the serenity of the answer. For a moment, her smirk faltered. Then she forced a laugh and turned back to her phone, unwilling to admit the words had struck deeper than she expected. Melissa pressed on. "Suit yourself. When we land, you'll regret this." Amira inhaled slowly, then exhaled. Her shoulders relaxed, her back pressed firmly against the leather seat. She had made her decision. She wouldn't move, not now, not ever. She picked up her phone at last. Her fingers hovered over the contacts list, pausing at Stephen Wallace's name. She did not press it, not yet, but soon. For now, she would let the world watch. She would let the injustice ripen until it revealed itself fully. Then, at the right moment, she would turn everything upside down. The engines hummed steadily, the cabin lights dimmed, and the plane sliced through the darkening sky. Yet inside Seat 2A, the real turbulence was only beginning. Amira closed her eyes briefly, hearing her father's voice again, firm and unyielding. "Dignity is not about what they give you, it's about what you refuse to surrender," she whispered to herself, barely audible. "I refuse." Her mind steadied, her resolve hardened. The breaking point had arrived, but she was not the one who would break. The hum of the engines was steady, but the atmosphere inside the cabin was anything but calm. Every passenger in first class was alert, their eyes trained on the silent battle unfolding at row 2. It was no longer just about a seat. It was about power, about dignity, about whether one woman's presence would be accepted or erased. Melissa Grant passed through the aisle again, her expression tight with anger. She had won half the battle already in her mind. Amira Johnson had been labeled difficult. The threat of security was in place. Now, all that remained was the final humiliation when the plane touched down. Victoria Hale kept her phone raised, the glow of her live stream lighting her face. Her smirk was fixed, her voice honeyed with cruelty. Still refusing, she narrated, still pretending this is her seat. "Just wait until we land. The show's only getting started." Her audience had swelled into hundreds of thousands now, Jordan Carter's stream overlapping with hers. But while Victoria's followers jeered, Jordan's were rallying. Their comments streamed across the screen, "Do not give in. This is proof of what we've been saying. She's so calm. I can't believe her strength. Why isn't the captain doing something?" Jordan lowered his phone for a moment, heart pounding. He wasn't an activist, not a journalist, just a student headed home. But he knew what he was seeing mattered. The story was writing itself in real time, and the truth needed witnesses. Amira sat perfectly still, her face serene, though inside her mind churned. She replayed Melissa's threats, Victoria's venom, Paul's weakness, Robert's absence. She felt the sting of every insult, the heat of every stare. Yet beneath it all ran a current of clarity. She was not powerless. She never had been. She had only chosen silence, waiting for the right moment to speak. Her phone buzzed again. This time she picked it up. The boardroom text glared back at her, market fallen harder. Media speculating. Need leadership now. She took a deep breath. Her company was trembling. And here she was, being treated as if she were a trespasser in a seat she had paid for. The absurdity almost made her laugh, but instead of laughter, her lips curved into something else, a small, steady smile. The time for silence was ending. She unlocked her phone and scrolled to her contacts. Her thumb hovered over Stephen Wallace's name. She could picture his voice already, crisp and commanding, the kind of voice that had steadied entire boardrooms. But she hesitated once more. She wanted them to reveal themselves completely, to show every passenger, every camera, every viewer what prejudice looked like when it was given room to grow. Only then would her truth carry the full weight it deserved. Melissa returned again, her patience shredded. "You think you're clever," she hissed under her breath, "but when those officers step on board, you'll see how clever you really are." Amira turned her head slowly, her voice calm but cutting. "Do you believe what you're saying, or are you simply hoping no one will notice the truth?" Melissa faltered, caught for a heartbeat in the steady weight of Amira's gaze. Then she straightened, clinging to anger as her shield. "Enjoy your last minutes in that seat." Victoria chuckled into her phone. "You heard it, folks. Last minutes." Amira leaned back, her decision made. She pressed Stephen Wallace's contact. The phone rang only once before his voice filled her ear. "Amira, thank God. Where are you? The markets are restless. The board is asking questions. We need your guidance." She spoke quietly, her voice calm but carrying through the hush of the cabin. "Stephen, I'm on flight 2285, seat 2A, and I'm being told I do not belong here." Stephen's voice hardened instantly. "What? Who told you that?" The cabin fell utterly silent. Melissa froze, eyes widening. Victoria lowered her phone slightly, suddenly uncertain. Paul shifted his weight, sensing the ground beneath him changing. Amira continued, her tone deliberate, every word a scalpel. "The lead flight attendant has accused me of fraud. The passenger beside me has recorded and mocked me for refusing to surrender my seat. The supervisor has threatened me with arrest, all while my boarding pass has been verified as valid." Gasps rippled through the rows. Jordan's phone trembled slightly as he realized the gravity of what was unfolding. His livestream comments exploded. "Wait, did she say Stephen Wallace? Who is she? OMG, this is bigger than we thought." Stephen's voice on the line sharpened with fury. "Stay seated. Amira, do not move. I will handle this immediately. They have no idea who they're dealing with." Melissa's face drained of color. Paul swallowed hard, sweat beading on his forehead. Even Victoria faltered, her smirk trembling, her phone dipping lower. Amira's voice remained calm. "I thought you should know. Stephen, not for my sake, for the sake of your airline." His reply was a promise made of steel. "By the time you land, heads will roll. Stay calm. You are not alone." She ended the call, placing the phone gently on her tray table. Then she folded her hands in her lap once more, her posture serene, her expression unreadable. The cabin was silent, a silence heavy with realization. Whispers began spreading, cautious at first, then urgent. Did she say Stephen Wallace? As in the chairman, she knows him personally. Wait, who is she? Jordan raised his phone again, his viewers exploding with theories. Guys, I think she's not just some passenger. This is huge. Amira turned her gaze toward Melissa, her voice low but unwavering. I gave you every chance to treat me as a passenger. You chose to treat me as a problem. That choice will follow you. Melissa's mouth opened, but no words came out. For the first time since boarding, her authority slipped. Paul stepped forward, his voice shaky. Dr. Johnson. I didn't realize Amira cut him off with a raised hand. You realized enough to threaten me. You realized enough to choose convenience over truth. That is all anyone needs to know. The weight of her words settled over him. He stepped back, his shoulders sagging, the clipboard heavy in his grip. Victoria sat frozen, her phone still in hand, but her smirk gone. She finally whispered, Who are you?" Amira turned her head, her eyes meeting Victoria's with calm finality. "Someone who will not be erased." The engines droned on, steady as ever, but the balance of power inside the cabin had shifted entirely. What began as humiliation was transforming into reckoning, and seat 2A was no longer just a seat. It was a throne carved from dignity, unshakable in the face of prejudice. The cabin had shifted. It was no longer an audience watching a spectacle. It was a courtroom, and every passenger knew the verdict had already changed. Dr. Amira Johnson sat still, her posture calm, her phone resting on the tray table like an unspoken weapon. The call with Stephen Wallace had lasted less than a minute, but it had detonated like thunder inside the fuselage. The man's name carried weight, the kind of weight that bent systems and toppled careers. Whispers spread through the rows. Some passengers leaned forward to share hurried speculation. Others pretended to scroll their phones while stealing glances at Amira. Did she say Stephen Wallace? One woman whispered. She called him directly. She must be someone important. Another replied, important. She's clearly powerful. No one just dials the chairman mid-flight. Melissa Grant's face was pale now, her authority crumbling in the silence. For the first time since the confrontation began, her voice wavered. She forced herself to speak, trying to regain control. "Ma'am, Dr. Johnson," she corrected herself quickly. "If there has been a misunderstanding, then I apologize. We were only following protocol." Her words rang hollow. The passengers had witnessed too much already. They had heard her threats, seen her hostility, felt the contempt she had poured into every sentence. The apology was nothing but a paper shield. Amira turned her head slightly, her voice calm, every syllable deliberate. "Protocol is not cruelty. Ms. Grant, protocol is not humiliation. What you followed was not training. It was prejudice dressed in uniform." The words hung in the air, sharp and undeniable. Melissa flinched as though struck. Victoria Hale, who had been live-streaming gleefully for the past hour, lowered her phone to her lap. Her smirk was gone, replaced with something closer to dread. Her audience was still exploding with comments, but now the tone had shifted. "OMG, she's connected to the chairman. Victoria's finished. She exposed herself more than anyone else. Delete the stream. Girl, you're in trouble." Victoria's throat tightened. She had built her brand on drama, on catching people at their lowest, but she had miscalculated. She had mocked a woman who clearly held immense power. The realization sank into her bones. This would not end when the plane landed. Jordan Carter, still recording, felt his own hands tremble. His stream had crossed 250,000 viewers. He hadn't asked for this, but now he was at the center of it. He steadied his voice, whispering into his camera. "You're watching history right now. She's not just holding her seat. She's holding all of us accountable." Paul Anderson shifted nervously in the aisle, his clipboard limp in his hands. He had sided with Melissa because it was easier, because it avoided conflict. Now that choice burned like acid in his gut. He cleared his throat, speaking toward Amira. "Dr. Johnson, I should have done more. I should have checked again." "I shouldn't have." Amira raised her hand gently, cutting him off. Her voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of truth. You should have remembered that leadership is not about avoiding conflict. It is about standing for what is right, even when it is uncomfortable. Paul lowered his gaze, shame flooding his expression. He had no defense. The passengers around them shifted. Some nodded quietly. Others whispered that they agreed. The tide had turned. Where once there was judgment and scorn, now there was recognition, even respect. Melissa tried again, her voice cracking at the edges. "I didn't know who you were." Amira's eyes locked onto hers. "That is the problem. You should not need to know my name to know my worth. A passenger is a passenger. Respect is not given because of who I am. It is required because of what I am, a human being." The cabin was silent, every word sinking deep. Some passengers looked down, ashamed at their earlier comments. Others stared at Amira with a newfound reverence. Victoria clenched her phone tighter. Her audience was still pouring in comments, some mocking her, others defending Amira. For the first time, she felt the spotlight turn against her. Her mouth went dry. Melissa stepped back, her voice small now. I didn't mean for it to come to this." Amira leaned forward slightly, her tone still calm. "It came to this because you believed your power was greater than my dignity. But dignity does not bow." The words reverberated like a sermon. A man in the back of first class finally spoke up. "She's right. We all saw it. She didn't do anything wrong. You all made her prove herself again and again. And still you weren't satisfied." Others murmured in agreement. The atmosphere was shifting fast, the current of support pulling toward Amira. Jordan lifted his phone higher, his voice steady now. "The world is watching, and they're not siding with prejudice. They're siding with her." Melissa's lips trembled. For the first time in her career, the uniform she wore felt like paper, unable to shield her from accountability. She glanced toward the cockpit, hoping for rescue from Captain Hughes. But the door remained shut. The man inside, too concerned with schedules to face the fire outside. Amira sat back, folding her arms across her chest. She had said what needed to be said. The rest would unfold on its own. Passengers whispered, some offering apologies with their eyes, others too proud to admit their complicity. Victoria shrank in her seat, staring at her phone, her live stream still running, but now filled with condemnation instead of praise. Paul scribbled something on his clipboard, but his hand shook so badly the letters blurred. He knew his career was hanging by a thread, and Melissa stood frozen in the aisle, a flight attendant no longer in control, her authority stripped bare by truth. Amira closed her eyes briefly, letting the rhythm of the engine steady her heartbeat. The storm had not ended. Security would still be waiting, but now the ground beneath her had shifted. She was no longer alone. She carried the eyes of passengers, the voices of viewers, the weight of truth. And truth was heavier than any uniform. The cabin no longer hummed with quiet judgment. It buzzed with energy, charged with the weight of revelation. The passengers had been witnesses, and now they were shifting into participants. Their whispers carried a new tone, not of dismissal, but of support. Dr. Amira Johnson sat in 2A, composed as ever, her hands folded lightly on her lap. She had not raised her voice once, yet the entire room had tilted toward her. Authority radiated not from a uniform or a title spoken aloud, but from her refusal to surrender dignity. Melissa Grant lingered in the aisle, her jaw tight, her voice brittle. She tried to steady herself, clinging to the last scraps of authority. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, raising her voice so it carried, "I want to assure you that this airline treats every passenger fairly. What you're witnessing is simply a misunderstanding." The words rang hollow, thin as paper. A passenger in row 3 shook his head and spoke out. "No, this isn't a misunderstanding. We've been sitting here watching you target her. You verified her ticket. We all saw it, and you still treated her like she didn't belong. Another passenger, a woman in row 5, added sharply. You threatened her with arrest? Don't tell us we imagined that." The ripples spread quickly, voices rising, support spilling into the open. The tide had turned, and Melissa could feel it washing over her. Her authority was collapsing. Victoria Hale shrank back in her seat, her phone still in her hands. Her live-stream chat was a wall of fury, her own followers turning against her. "Delete this now." One comment screamed, "You exposed your own hate." Another said, "She's the CEO, you idiot." Another line scrolled by. Victoria's stomach dropped. She hadn't just recorded cruelty, she had broadcast it in real time, her voice gleeful, her words dripping with venom. And now hundreds of thousands of strangers had the receipts. Jordan Carter, still recording, steadied his phone with renewed determination. His audience was surging past 400,000. He spoke into the camera softly. She never raised her voice. She never left her seat. And yet they treated her like a criminal. This is why we document, because without proof, they would have called it a misunderstanding. His viewers responded instantly. "Stay strong, Amira. This is history. Melissa needs to be fired." Paul Anderson stood nearby, his clipboard trembling in his hands. His face was pale with regret. He had backed the wrong side, and now the consequences were written across the passenger's eyes. Still, he tried to salvage something. "We should wait for proper review," Paul stammered. "Let's not jump to conclusions. The airline has procedures." A passenger cut him off sharply. "We just watched your procedure. We watched you threaten a woman with security when you knew she was right. That's not procedure. That's prejudice." Paul flinched, the truth slicing through his weak defense. He lowered his eyes, shame heavy in his posture. Melissa's voice grew sharper, desperation creeping in. "You don't understand. We have to maintain order." She was refusing to cooperate. Amira finally spoke, her voice calm and steady, yet carrying the force of a gavel striking wood. "Order is not maintained by stripping people of dignity. It is maintained by respecting it. I cooperated fully. My boarding pass was valid. My presence was valid. It was your prejudice that was disruptive, not me." The cabin fell into silence for a moment as her words landed. Then applause broke out. At first it was a single pair of hands clapping, hesitant but firm. Then another joined, and another. Soon. The sound filled the first-class cabin, an eruption of support that drowned out Melissa's brittle protests. Melissa froze, stunned. She had never lost a cabin before. She had never felt authority slip from her fingers so completely. Her cheeks flushed hot as the sound of clapping grew louder. Victoria lowered her phone completely now, her hand trembling. She knew what the internet was doing already. Clips of her cruelty were being shared, spliced, amplified. She could already imagine headlines with her name, her face, her mocking words. Her smirk had become her undoing. Amira sat still, her expression serene. She did not smile at the applause, nor did she gloat. She simply allowed it to wash over her, a quiet acknowledgement that truth had finally broken through the noise. Jordan whispered into his phone. "Listen to that. They're clapping for her, not because she's powerful, not because of who she knows, but because she refused to be erased." Melissa tried once more, her voice sharp and defensive. "You all don't know the pressure we're under. We have rules for a reason. If every passenger acted like this, there would be chaos." A man in row 2 across from Amira leaned forward, his tone pointed. "If every passenger acted with her dignity, there would be no chaos. The chaos came from you." The words struck like a verdict. Melissa's mouth opened, then closed again. She had no reply. Paul shifted nervously, his hands trembling so badly the clipboard nearly slipped. He muttered under his breath, "It's over. It's all over." Amira turned her gaze toward Melissa one last time. Her voice was soft but filled with finality. "When this plane lands, the world will not remember your excuses. They will remember your choices, and choices have consequences." Melissa swallowed hard, her throat tight. She turned away, her authority shattered, her future uncertain. The applause subsided, replaced by murmurs of support directed toward Amira. Some passengers leaned toward her quietly, offering words of solidarity. "We're with you. You handled this with so much grace. Thank you for not giving in." Amira acknowledged them with small nods, her composure unbroken. But inside, her heart thudded with a mix of exhaustion and determination. The battle was far from over, security still awaited, the true reckoning was still ahead. She glanced at her phone again. Messages poured in from her team, stock volatility, media inquiries, speculation spreading like wildfire. She typed a single reply. "Hold steady. Truth is coming." Outside the windows, the horizon glowed with the faint outline of city lights. The plane would descend soon. The next stage would begin on the ground. But here, in the sky, the power had already shifted. The passengers had chosen sides. The truth had pierced through the performance of authority, and Melissa Grant, once confident in her control, now stood alone in the aisle, stripped of the power she thought untouchable. The captain's voice broke the tension with sterile calm. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be beginning our descent into New York shortly. Please fasten your seatbelts and return your trays to the upright position." His words floated over the intercom like background noise, but everyone in first class knew the real landing would not be routine. The descent was not only toward the runway but toward accountability. Dr. Amira Johnson tightened her belt, her movements unhurried, her posture still regal. Outwardly, she seemed as composed as she had when the ordeal began. Inwardly, her mind ticked like a clock. Each second brought her closer to the gate, to the waiting line of security officers she had been promised. She imagined their uniforms, their expressions rehearsed in neutrality. She knew the script they would enter, escort her out, and only later would the truth trickle through official channels. But this time, the script had been torn apart. 500,000 viewers had seen the pages burn. Melissa Grant walked briskly through the aisle, checking seatbelts with jerky, anxious movements. She avoided Amira's gaze. Her hands shook slightly as she tugged at buckles. She knew her authority had collapsed, but routine gave her something to cling to. Passengers murmured softly as the plane tilted downward, the lights of the city beginning to shimmer below. Some whispered to each other. Others leaned toward Amira with quiet words of encouragement. "Stay strong. We'll back you up." Paul Anderson sat hunched in a jump seat near the galley, his clipboard abandoned. His face was pale, his eyes hollow. He looked like a man awaiting his own sentence. Victoria Hale's phone had gone dark in her lap. She had stopped streaming, unable to face the tidal wave of backlash crashing through her notifications. The comments replayed in her head like a haunting chorus. Cruelty, once her currency, had become evidence against her. Jordan Carter, on the other hand, still streamed, though his tone had shifted. He spoke less now, letting the viewers absorb the gravity of what they were seeing. The numbers on his screen climbed toward 600,000. His hands no longer trembled. He knew this was no longer just a video, it was testimony. As the plane descended through scattered clouds, Amira closed her eyes briefly. She thought of her father's words, carved into her memory like scripture. Dignity is not a gift, it is a stand. She felt the truth of them now. She had stood, and the world had seen. Melissa finally stopped at her row, unable to ignore her any longer. Her voice was lower now, almost pleading. "Dr. Johnson, look, when we land, there will be security. I can still explain this as a misunderstanding. But if you escalate," Amira opened her eyes, her voice cutting gently through the air. "I will not escalate. The truth is already louder than any of us." Melissa swallowed, her lips tightening. "You could ruin my career." Amira studied her for a long moment. "No, you did that yourself. I only refuse to let you ruin me." The words pierced deeper than any insult could. Melissa stepped back, retreating to the galley, her shoulders sagging. The plane tilted more steeply now, the engines humming in descent. Lights outside shimmered closer, clusters of neighborhoods and highways glowing against the dark. Passengers shifted, some tightening their belts, others straightening their posture as if preparing for judgment themselves. Jordan whispered into his phone, "She hasn't moved." Not once. They threatened her, mocked her, humiliated her, but she stayed. And now we're minutes away from landing. Whatever happens, this isn't just her fight anymore. The comments poured in. "She's our voice. They better not touch her. Melissa is finished. Record everything." Amira exhaled slowly, her mind a storm of calculation and memory. She thought of the shareholders watching market tickers. She thought of the young women who would one day hear this story and draw courage from it. She thought of her mother, her father, every ancestor whose dignity had been questioned and denied. And she thought of the moment she would step off this plane, watched by strangers, cameras, and the world itself. The landing gear thudded into place beneath them. The cabin jolted slightly, and with it came the awareness that the moment of reckoning was seconds away. Melissa returned once more, her voice shaken now. "Please, Dr. Johnson, just stay calm when we land." Amira looked up at her, calm but unyielding. "I have been calm all along. Perhaps it is you who should consider calmness now." The words silenced Melissa completely. She turned away, her authority broken, her fear now visible. The runway lights appeared in the window, long lines stretching into the distance. The engines roared, the descent sharp. The cabin braced itself, seat backs straight, eyes forward. But no one was thinking about seat belts or tray tables. They were thinking about the moment the doors would open. The wheels slammed onto the runway, the aircraft shaken violently for a few seconds before steadying into a smooth roll. The reverse thrust roared, the plane slowing, the city lights growing brighter through the windows. Inside row 2, Amira's hands rested steady on her lap. She did not flinch at the impact. She did not lean forward in anticipation. She sat as she had sat all along, calm, composed, unmovable. The plane taxied toward the gate. The murmurs grew louder. Some passengers whispered about testifying on her behalf. Others speculated about the security waiting outside. A few simply stared at her with awe. Victoria pressed her phone against her forehead. Her eyes shut tight. She knew her world outside the plane was collapsing already. Her reputation, her sponsorships, her brand, it was all unraveling in real time. Paul rubbed his temples, his mind racing with the inevitable conversation with his superiors. He wondered if there was still time to resign before the hammer fell. Melissa stood frozen at the front of the cabin, her face pale, her posture stiff. She no longer barked orders. She no longer carried herself like the queen of the aisle. She was simply another passenger now, waiting for judgment, and judgment was only a jet bridge away. Amira glanced once more out the window, watching the terminal grow closer. She whispered to herself, so quietly no one else could hear, "Let them come." The engines powered down. The plane eased into its final stop. A chime rang overhead, and the seatbelt sign blinked off. But no one reached for the overhead bins. No one stood. The cabin sat still, holding its breath. The doors would open in moments, and with them, the truth would step fully into the light. The jet bridge locked onto the aircraft with a dull metallic thud. The familiar sound that usually signaled the end of a journey instead felt like the drumbeat of an approaching verdict. Every passenger in first class stayed seated, their eyes fixed on the aisle. The air was thick, charged with suspense. They knew this would not be a normal disembarkation. Melissa Grant stood near the front, her uniform neat but her composure unraveling. She smoothed her apron nervously, waiting for the inevitable arrival of security. Her earlier bravado had evaporated, leaving only dread in its place. Paul Anderson remained hunched in his jump seat, staring at the floor. His clipboard rested uselessly on his lap. He looked like a man awaiting his own trial, knowing the verdict was already sealed. Victoria Hale sat rigid, her phone clutched in her hands, but the screen black. Her live stream had ended in chaos, hundreds of thousands of viewers condemning her words. She scrolled through the notifications with trembling fingers. Hashtags with her name burned across social media like wildfire. She imagined tomorrow's headlines and felt a wave of nausea. Jordan Carter, still recording, whispered softly into his phone. "They're here. Security is coming on board. We're about to see what happens when truth meets power." His audience now surpassed 700,000. The cabin door swung open, and 3 uniformed security officers stepped inside. Their presence filled the narrow entryway, their expressions neutral, professional, unreadable. The passengers held their breath. Melissa immediately straightened, her voice rising as she gestured toward row 2. "Officers, that's her. Seat 2A. She refused to comply. She disrupted the flight. The officers moved down the aisle with measured steps, their boots striking the floor in the steady rhythm. All eyes followed them as they approached Amira Johnson. Amira remained seated, calm, her hands resting lightly on the armrests. She did not flinch. She did not lower her gaze. Her stillness radiated strength, a silent reminder that dignity cannot be escorted away. One officer stopped at her row, his expression professional but cautious. "Ma'am, we've been asked to escort you off the aircraft. Can you come with us?" please." The passengers shifted uncomfortably. A murmur rose, low but urgent. Several voices spoke at once. "She didn't do anything. She was treated unfairly. You can't just remove her." The officer glanced around, clearly aware this was no ordinary situation. He looked back at Amira, waiting for her response. Amira's voice was calm, steady, unshaken. "Before you take another step, I suggest you contact your director of operations. Tell them Dr. Amira Johnson is on board. Tell them she has already spoken with Stephen Wallace, and tell them this is being broadcast live to over 700,000 people." The officer blinked, his composure momentarily slipping. He turned his head toward his colleague, who raised his brows in silent acknowledgement. Melissa's face twisted, desperation flaring. "She's bluffing. She's just another passenger. Remove her before this gets worse." But her words carried no weight now. The officers looked uneasy, caught between procedure and the truth unfolding before them. Jordan lifted his phone higher, capturing every moment. His audience exploded with comments. "She said Stephen Wallace again. They can't touch her. This is about to blow wide open." Amira reached calmly for her phone, her fingers steady. She pressed a single button. The speaker came alive with a familiar, commanding voice. "This is Stephen Wallace. I understand you've reached the gate. Officers, stand down immediately. Dr. Johnson is not to be removed under any circumstances." The cabin erupted. Gasps, whispers, exclamations filled the air. Melissa froze, her mouth open in shock. Paul buried his face in his hands. Victoria's phone slipped from her fingers onto the floor. The officer nearest to Amira straightened instantly, his tone respectful now. "Understood, sir." He stepped back, his posture shifting from enforcer to protector. Stephen's voice continued, calm but edged with steel. "Ms. Grant, Mr. Anderson, you will both surrender your badges the moment you step off this aircraft. Effective immediately. You are relieved of duty pending termination. Captain Hughes will be questioned separately for his failure to intervene." Melissa's knees buckled slightly. She gripped the galley counter for support. Her face drained of color. Paul looked as if the air had been punched out of him. Stephen's tone softened when he addressed Amira. "Dr. Johnson, please accept my personal apology. We will handle the fallout from here. You will be escorted safely to the terminal, and the airline will issue a public statement tonight. This ends now." Amira ended the call, her face serene. She looked around the cabin, meeting the eyes of passengers one by one. "You have all seen what dignity looks like when it is tested, and you have seen what truth can do when it refuses to bow." The passengers erupted into applause, louder than before, filling the cabin with the sound of solidarity. Some stood, clapping with tears in their eyes. Others simply nodded, their expressions heavy with recognition. Melissa slumped against the wall, tears threatening her eyes. She wanted to protest, to plead, but the words caught in her throat. She had built her authority on control, and now control had abandoned her. Paul sat motionless, defeated, the clipboard slipping from his lap to the floor. He knew his career was over, his cowardice etched into memory. Victoria bent down to pick up her phone, but her hands shook so violently she could barely hold it. The world outside the plane had already decided her fate. Her brand of cruelty had become her own downfall. Amira rose from her seat for the first time since the ordeal began. She moved gracefully into the aisle, her presence commanding, her dignity intact. The officers stepped aside, not as enforcers but as guardians. Jordan lowered his phone slightly, his voice breaking with awe. She stood her ground, and she won. Amira paused at the doorway, looking back one last time. Her voice carried clearly, a final verdict. Respect is not a privilege. It is the foundation of every journey. Never forget that. The cabin was silent, then erupted again into thunderous applause. And with that, Dr. Amira Johnson stepped off the plane, not as a passenger escorted by security, but as a leader walking into history. The terminal was already awake with flashing lights when the cabin door opened. Reporters had gathered, tipped off by passengers who had texted updates mid-flight. Cameras rose like a tide, microphones jutted forward, voices called out Amira's name even before she stepped off the plane. Dr. Amira Johnson emerged with calm poise, flanked not by security escorting her away, but by security holding space for her. The applause of passengers still echoed faintly from the cabin behind her. She walked steadily down the jet bridge, her heels striking the floor with deliberate rhythm, each step a statement. Melissa Grant followed minutes later, her head bowed, her face pale. She clutched her apron like it could shield her, but it only reminded her of the authority she had lost. Paul Anderson trailed behind, his shoulders slumped, the clipboard gone. They were met at the gate by airline staff who quietly collected their badges. Melissa's lips quivered as she surrendered hers, but she said nothing. Paul did not even look up. Victoria Hale emerged next, her phone pressed tightly against her chest. She was instantly recognized by a cluster of onlookers. Some jeered. Others shouted her name with scorn. She covered her face, but cameras still caught the tremor in her hands. Her online persona, once built on confidence, had collapsed into a public spectacle of shame. Inside the terminal, Amira paused before the crowd of microphones and flashing bulbs. For a moment, she said nothing, letting the silence stretch, commanding the attention of every eye and lens. Finally, she spoke, her voice clear and resonant. Today, I sat in a seat I paid for, a seat I had every right to occupy, and yet I was told again and again that I did not belong. Not because of a boarding pass, not because of any rule, but because of prejudice dressed as protocol. The terminal hushed, hanging on every word. I refused to move. She continued, not because I'm stubborn, not because I wanted a fight, but because dignity is not negotiable. If I had surrendered, I would have told every young woman, every young man who looks like me, that silence is safer than truth, and that is a lie I will never live. Reporters shouted questions at once, a cacophony of voices. Amira raised her hand gently, and the noise subsided. She chose her words carefully, her tone both firm and empathetic. This is not about one flight attendant, or one passenger, or one airline. This is about a system that allows bias to hide behind procedure. That system ends today. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. Cameras zoomed closer. Stephen Wallace and I have spoken, she said. The airline will launch immediate reforms, mandatory bias and dignity training, real-time incident reporting directly to executives, transparent audits of every complaint, and an independent board, led by outside voices to ensure no story like mine is buried. The words struck like lightning. Reporters scribbled furiously. Headlines were already forming. Passengers who had witnessed the ordeal nodded, some clapping softly, others calling out yes in support. Amira looked around the room, her eyes sweeping across the cameras and faces. But let us be clear, this is not just about airlines. This is about how we treat each other wherever we go, in boardrooms, in classrooms, in hospitals, in every space we share. Respect is not a privilege. It is the foundation of every journey we take together. The applause that followed shook the terminal. Some reporters clapped, others simply let the moment wash over them. Behind her, Melissa crumbled into a chair, her face buried in her hands. Paul stared at the floor, unmoving. Victoria fled toward a side exit, flashes following her, her phone buzzing endlessly in her palm. Jordan Carter emerged from the jet bridge, phone still in hand, his live stream finally ending after hours. He wiped his eyes, overcome with the magnitude of what he had witnessed. He had boarded as just another student. He left as a witness to history. Amira stepped forward once more, concluding with quiet strength, "I did not seek this spotlight, but if it shines on me, let it illuminate the truth. Dignity is not for sale, respect is not optional, and justice is not delayed. Today, we take a step toward skies that are truly equal." The terminal erupted again, cameras flashing, applause echoing, voices rising in affirmation. Amira turned and walked steadily through the crowd, her security detail opening a path. Each step carried the weight of history, the promise of reform, and the unshakable truth that one woman's refusal to bow had changed the course of an entire industry. And, though the flight was over, the journey had only just begun. What began as an attempt to strip away one woman's dignity ended as a lesson for the entire world. Dr. Amira Johnson's calm defiance revealed not only the prejudice she faced, but the power of refusing to bow. In her courage, we are reminded that respect is not a luxury. It is the foundation of justice, of humanity, of every journey we take together. Tonight, we remember that silence in the face of discrimination is complicity. We honor the passengers who chose to clap instead of look away, and we condemn the actions that tried to turn bias into law. Let this story echo long after the applause fades, because the skies above us and the lives among us must be equal for all. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Like this video to help its message reach further, and subscribe to our channel, so together we can keep telling stories that demand respect, inspire change, and remind us that dignity is never up for negotiation.